For IR realists, the only thing we need to look at to predict and understand the behavior of a state is the national interest of that nation state. Realists argue that many of the factors that we would usually look at to explain the behavior of a state, we should actually pay no attention to. We will just mislead ourselves if we think that things like the individual leader, the ideology, the political system, even the history and political culture of a nation, we can ignore all of that. We should even ignore the reasons a state or a state's leaders give for a foreign policy action. In general, I'm conflating the different types of realism, and I'm skipping over some of the distinctions and disagreements between realists, but there is one that I want to spend some time on. That's a distinction between offensive and defensive realists. For offensive realists, world politics is a zero-sum game, and the structure of international politics, that is, the lack of any authority, this anarchic structure of international relations leaves states with only two choices: to be a weak state that is picked on, exploited, or to be a strong state which is able to safeguard its citizens and its own national interest. As John Mearsheimer puts it, it is better to be Godzilla than Bambi. And therefore, states, quite reasonably, will inevitably and almost always try to gain as much power as possible. The United States and other countries would prefer to be Godzilla rather than Bambi, and the United States should try to be Godzilla. Defensive realists, on the other hand, believe that there are many occasions when a state's becoming more powerful may actually make it less secure. Its newfound power may disturb its rivals, may make its rivals or neighbors see it in a new way now as a threat. They argue that a stable balance of power is possible and is best for all nations. Both kinds of realists believe that states are determined to maximize their security, but for defensive realists, the way to maximize security may or may not be to increase power, whereas for offensive realists, the only way to ensure security is to become more powerful. These international relations theorists see and predict the world differently. Offensive realists believe that international relations are very rarely stable because all nations are constantly trying to increase their power, which may indeed cause conflict. Whereas defensive realists say, no, there's actually a tendency towards a status quo balance of power. Both kinds of realists agree that nation states are the only significant actors in international politics. We can safely ignore the roles of international organizations, of domestic politics, of political structures, of political values. Both sets of realists believe that we should ignore morality, both when we are analyzing the actions of states and if we are a state trying to decide how to behave in world affairs. This understandably has led to some people accusing realists of being immoral or at least amoral. Ultimately, you'll make up your own mind on that question. But realists argue that their philosophy is actually the more humane one. They argue that a certain amount, a fairly high amount of conflict is going to be inherent and inevitable in international relations. But by looking at international relations logically, states can at least eliminate those uses of force that don't even serve their national interests. For example, most realists argued against invading Iraq in 2003, arguing that establishing democracy and modern liberal rights there was not in the U.S. national interest. Similarly, while many realists agreed the United States should take action to destabilize and neutralize al-Qaeda, most argued the United States should avoid attempting nation building in Afghanistan. To give just one more example, many realists argue that the United States is partly to blame for our current tensions with Russia. The American belief that Ukraine and Georgia had the right to join NATO if they wished was bound to provoke Russia. Powerful countries are very averse to having hostile countries near their borders. Realists like Walt and Mearsheimer suggest that had the United States understood realist principles, we might have avoided much of our current conflict with Russia. I look forward to hearing your reactions and thoughts on realism in the discussion forum.